So I made this video yesterday. It's no longer up. I'm gonna private it. And it's about a group of people on Tumblr, sort of a type of user who I believe is faking an intellectual disability for clout, specifically to get in little fights in the Tumblr autistic community, leveraging the identity of saying that they have an intellectual disability. I was always gonna get rid of that video because it was kind of disorganized, but I'm also realizing that I was having a little too much fun in that video. Like, I have been laughing at the way that those people write, because to me it comes off very transparently as trying to imitate the way that they think someone with an intellectual disability would write, and that does make me laugh. But I just I don't know, it's not a good look. The fact that like it's close enough to how somebody else talks that people actually would believe it makes me feel like it's a little too close to making fun of how somebody else talks, you know? Anyway, so this video is going to be like a little bit less fun, but I guess I want to discuss these kind of blogs, like what I think they're doing, why I think they're fake, and sort of what's a deeper problem in the autistic community that causes this to be accepted, and like as theoretically as like an autistic person without an intellectual disability, or as somebody else involved in the disability community who doesn't have an intellectual disability, like I don't know, what are some better ways for us to try to listen to people and support people than just trying to do it on Tumblr. So, okay, so I got really sick, and it sort of coincided with me seeing some of these Tumblrs for the first time, and also some friends also being curious about the same thing, also looking into these Tumblrs. And the first thing I found, or I guess like the first thing that was really striking, was this particular Tumblr user who apparently was identifying as an autistic AAC user. In that case, I think someone who communicates by typing, with an intellectual disability and multiple other disabilities. And what was kind of notable was the way that this person was being spoken about by another user, to the point that it seemed that one of them was a sock puppet of the other. So basically this other person was sort of presenting as somehow the caretaker of this other user who was just an online friend, supposedly, that they had never met, but basically being very patronizing about this user and saying sort of like, oh, well, they can't be told about like this and this and this because it would only upset them, and they wouldn't even be able to understand it because of their disability. This is where I kind of was like, wow, and people think they're being woke listening to this. And so, well, they can't talk about this because of their disability, and I help manage their social interactions on Tumblr because of their disability. And but then like what was so funny was that this purportedly AAC using intellectual disability user was getting into all of these kind of like in the weeds Tumblr fights about whether it's like whether it's offensive to say like severe and mild autism, or whether it's offensive to talk about autism levels. And like I couldn't help but notice that this person was presenting points of view that are not that popular in like the autistic self-advocate community. Like, you know, people aren't really keen on like severe autism, mild autism and stuff. Most people don't like those words. And so I couldn't help but notice that this person was coming and saying like the opposite of like common views and getting into arguments with people, but then sort of leveraging their identity to say, well, I am severely autistic and like you shouldn't tell me that I'm not. And then meanwhile, even their friend, I was noticing, would even basically step in and say, well, why are you arguing with a severely autistic person or a severely intellectually disabled person? And like, you know, so basically trying to win these arguments where this person had like a fairly unpopular opinion on the basis of just saying that they have all these disabilities and they have an intellectual disability. So that was one that first really struck me because the dynamic seemed to be so odd. And then sorry, I gotta drink some water. Then I found out about this other user. Now, similarly, I was seeing this user kind of getting into a lot of fights about who can identify as disabled? Are some autistic people exaggerating their disability? Like, you know, if autistic people have a lot of movement problems and they can't stand up because of their brain, is it okay for them to identify as having a physical disability, or is that appropriation? You know, things that we could talk about. But just like, I just kind of noticed that like a lot of this person's talk was sort of about going and like telling other autistic people, because this person also was autistic, telling other autistic people, autistic able-bodied people without an intellectual disability, that like they were being too privileged and like appropriating other disabilities. Just all this like really boring Tumblr, like, interdisability fights. This person identifies as having an intellectual disability, by the way. And they also, to be fair, a lot of these users say things that I agree with the content of. Like, they often talk about stuff like, you know, when you're in kind of like a social justice or leftist space, like, maybe you shouldn't expect everybody to talk in this really fancy way or like understand all the words, because it is like kind of pushing out people with intellectual disabilities. You should kind of understand that people may not always understand how to say things in like the most politically correct way. People may need things explained more. Like, people may just kind of do little things that like you see as messing up because they don't understand. What is very striking to me though is that, first of all, like, that's exactly the type of thing that these people are arguing about. Like, that's what I find really interesting. I do agree with that content, but like, they themselves are arguing about all these little things. And, you know, I mean, I'm not saying it's like impossible, but it was just kind of like their actions sort of seemed to not reflect what they were saying. But then the thing that I particularly noticed is just the way that these people write. I'm trying to find a way to say this without laughing at the way that they write, because to me it does come off as obviously fake. And a lot of them write in the third person. Some of them say me instead of I. It's like, notably to me, as someone who has a lot of just kind of like in-person acquaintances with intellectual disabilities, so, you know, I have like a lot of Facebook friends or whatever, and I see how a lot of people with intellectual disabilities type. It's much more normal, much more like the way most people type than the way that these Tumblr users type. So these Tumblr users type in a way that like really sticks out, because you know, it's like if I was trying to post like, I'm really hungry and I want to have some pizza, I would instead be posting like, me hungry, 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 want pizza, so much pizza, pizza, pizza. Okay, I laughed. I did laugh. Because to me, it comes off as someone who is trying to write in a certain way. And when these users, first of all, I think most people don't call them on this because they're having kind of the same reaction as me, like, oh, well, it would be really bad to think that someone is faking their disability if they're not. Like, I don't want to say that the way that this person writes sounds fake, but if anyone does talk to them about it, the person will usually be saying something like, well, because I use an AAC device, you know, it's simpler for me to write this way, or simply just like, I write this way because I have an intellectual disability. Like, I've even seen some of these people like really go off and be like, I can't change the way that I write. So is that true? Do people write like that? I personally don't know anyone who writes like that. And I'm not an expert. I don't know everybody with an intellectual disability in the world. I would say of the people I know, only a very small amount of people are AAC users. I don't know that many AAC users with an intellectual disability. I found myself in the weird position of kind of just going and like looking at social media pages of people that I knew had a disability and be like, what is this based on? Like, does anyone actually write like this? And you know, all I could find was that sometimes people write in like a more simple way, where they'll kind of like leave out words that other people might put in a sentence. So to kind of like return to what I said earlier, you know, it might be like, I go for pizza, really hungry. So it's like, you know, if I'm selecting words or icons on a screen, maybe it's easier for me to not go and like I am going for pizza because I'm really hungry. It's like simpler for me to put like a shorter sentence, and you know, it can be harder to like conjugate and stuff like that, so I'm just kind of putting the words together so you can get the point. Like, to me, it's like someone weirdly trying to copy that, but trying to draw attention to it, whereas I feel like most people who write in a way that sounds kind of different, or people who have some limits on how well they can read or write or talk, like I usually feel like people are kind of trying to downplay it as much as they can. I feel like often people are like a little embarrassed, which I don't think anybody should be, but people don't try to draw attention to the fact that they write in a different way. And these people, on the other hand, feels like they're trying to write in a way that comes off as like very, very, very different than how most people write, really stick out on the website, in my opinion, because they don't want anyone to say, oh, I don't know if this person really has an intellectual disability. Ironically, if they wrote the way that they normally write, like, they would sound more like most people with an intellectual disability, but they write in this other way instead to be like, oh, look, I'm so different. So then people will maybe be like, wow, like this person is really different. Like, you know, they're on Tumblr. I don't have all the physical cues or just like all the different things in real life that I could sort of use to like judge if this person is who they say they are. So, but the way that they write looks really different. And yeah, so that kind of, so first of all, that struck me, the fact that it seemed to sort of be intentionally playing up a simple way of writing, or sometimes like with like referring to yourself in the third person, that's not really like easier than, you know, not using pronouns or something. Like, it's sort of, it seems like an extra thing to do to make your writing look different. Maybe I'm wrong about that particular thing, but I don't know anybody that I know in real life or any public figure with a disability who writes in the third person because they have a disability. That's just the case. That's my personal experience. If you know someone who's an exception to that, like, or if you're an exception to that yourself, like, I apologize and let me know that I was wrong, and I'll apologize. But yeah. So there were those two things, but then I think what started to really strike me about these people was not just that they were getting in these really in the weeds arguments, but I know a lot of people with intellectual disabilities, but I'm not really involved in like the intellectual disability self-advocacy movement. So I definitely don't want to speak with any like false authority on that. But I do know like how I would try to have a conversation or explain a concept with somebody that I know. Obviously it would depend on the person and their disability and like how well they're going to understand stuff, but also, for example, like if you look at stuff that's written in plain language or easy read, you know, some organizations do this like specifically to be accessible to people with an intellectual disability. So there's like kind of rules involved, like writing sentences in a certain way, not kind of like putting a bunch of ideas together all at once, but kind of like explaining each idea. And basically, as I'm reading these posts, I don't see, it doesn't seem as if the person writing them has any understanding of the fact that a lot of people with an intellectual disability genuinely might take longer to understand or express an idea, or might not always be able to express an idea as clearly. And again, like, this is very sort of dodgy, subjective stuff, but it's just, as I was reading lots and lots of these posts, all I could think was, this sounds like somebody who does not have an intellectual disability, wrote a post, and then translated the post to be worded in a different way that is what they think someone with an intellectual disability sounds like, but they have no understanding of the way that such a person might actually express themselves differently or think through ideas in a different way. Yeah, so that's basically what really struck me. And that pissed me off, because it made me feel like these people were like paying all this lip service to these ideas, like, oh, you should understand that like people won't understand stuff as easily, blah blah blah, but like they literally like themselves were not even seeming to understand that well enough to do a convincing job faking having an intellectual disability to meet someone who maybe has more experience than like the average person on Tumblr. Like, yeah, like it just, again, like I don't want to sound derogatory toward the people that they're possibly pretending to be, but like, there was something about the way that they were trying to sound that really rubbed me the wrong way. And yeah, I'm just looking at my notes a little bit here. Okay, so what's the problem? I think the thing is, unfortunately, there's like so many people out there who just like don't really acknowledge people with intellectual disabilities at all. Let's just go ahead with like the disability rights movement and the neurodiversity movement and just not talk about them. Like I've lost count of how many times I've heard somebody try to discuss the idea of neurodiversity and be like, neurodiversity includes so many different disabilities. Go on listing disabilities for 10 minutes and never include intellectual disabilities or Down syndrome, you know, other disabilities that go hand in hand with intellectual disabilities, just like every other disability, but not them. So some people are kind of beyond that point, and they are realizing, oh, I should be including and thinking about people with intellectual disabilities more, but like at the same time kind of struggling. Like I think for a lot of autistic people without an intellectual disability specifically, we kind of came up in blogging and Tumblr and like all these like internet and very text-based ways of interacting with people, and in reality there really aren't a lot of people with intellectual disabilities in those spaces. And one thing is, like, when people talk about this, they're always like, oh, are we not making them feel welcome? And it's like, you don't even understand that like some people with those disabilities have a more limited ability to read and write, or cannot read and write, and that's why they're not using these spaces for fun. That's not what they do for fun. Like, can you understand that? Like, apparently not. Like, you have to actually go into other spaces if you want to meet other people who genuinely don't come into your space for fun, because it's not a good space, it's not a fun space for them. So it's like people are a little bit trying, like, oh, I guess I should listen to this blogger who's saying something that is actually something that I wouldn't listen to if it came from like an autism professional or an autism parent or some random person, because it may actually be offensive to me, but I'll accept it because they say they have an intellectual disability and I want to listen to that community. No, don't just listen to somebody on Tumblr, like, please. So I guess my sort of first suggestion was just like, I'm sorry to say touched grass, but just like, if you just go and you look into volunteering with Special Olympics or like lots of other programs that might be around where you live for people with intellectual disabilities, like, like my sister goes to like theater classes and there's always volunteers there. I've volunteered there at times when I'm like not working for my sister that much and like wanting to be in touch with the community. I've been doing that like while I've been in school. Or like an art program. Like, there's lots of ways that you could just go. You can meet a lot of people, you get to know a lot of people's different personalities and experiences, which first of all like is valuable in itself. You can learn more about like issues that their community faces, but also I would hope you'll get more of a sense of like when someone is faking having an intellectual disability, because you'll have like a genuine idea of how a disability might affect the way that people talk or write or express themselves. Yeah. And then I guess my final word is that, so this is something that's always bothered me, because it's hard to know the right label to say here. Like, I actually, even though I think most people would not consider this, like, a lot of people in the autistic community and the disability community would probably consider this an offensive label, but the label, like, profound, is actually one that I've always kind of liked. To me, it describes a group of people with disabilities who often have multiple disabilities, are diagnosed with a profound intellectual disability, or just kind of are not really able to be assessed because of kind of like not really responding to directions or talking or writing or really engaging with a tester. So just kind of a group of people where they have a limited ability to communicate, they may have a lot of other issues, and when it comes to this group of people, you may just not really know a lot of what they think and experience as a mystery. And I don't mean this in a weird way. I don't have a special connection, but that's just a group of people that I like being around, and I've always enjoyed working with that group of people. That's why I started working for my chosen sister. And I like the word profound because to me profound means deep. Like, individuals from this group have a lot of depths, and it takes a long time to get to know them and see what they're about, because they can't just tell you. And I think what kind of frustrates me is that what's always frustrated me is that you always see people, like, for example, like, you know, shitty autism parents who are like, my child is so severe, they can't do blah, 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 blah. And like, I always look at their child and I'm kind of like, I know a lot of people who are like, way more impacted by disability and like way less able to do daily activities than your child, and way less able to communicate than your child. And like, not only that, but like, just because like their families like aren't part of the same like shitty autism community, like their families actually often have like a more positive attitude and are more supportive and affirming than you are. But also just like, there's just something about people being like, oh, my child is the most severely disabled person in the whole world, and I'm just like looking at all these people over here. Like, it just really bothers me. Like, I'm just like, okay, look at all the people. Like, if you're gonna emphasize how like you're so special and you're on one end, like make sure you're actually on one end. So I'm kind of noticing that with these Tumblr users, they're kind of getting on my nerves too, because, you know, let's say that these people have every disability they say they have. I don't think they do. But if they do, they're going on Tumblr, they're able to blog, they're able to write, and they're going on there and saying like, I'm so severe, and like, you know, calling out other people for not wanting them to call themselves severe, and, you know, really leveraging the fact that they're severe, and like leveraging the fact that they're saying they're from a community that isn't often represented on Tumblr to make people listen to them, trying to speak for that community. And I'm kind of like, bro, like, look at all these people over here that like by definition like can't go on Tumblr and write about stuff. Like, you're just like you're doing the same thing. It really bothers me. And I think, like, side note, if it's kind of too late for a side note, this is a long video, but I think by definition, like, the most vocal members of a community or the people who are involved in advocacy always like don't represent like the average people in that community, just because like those are the people who are able to become involved in advocacy. Like, and that's always seemed like a stupid thing to be leveled at the autistic community, you know, saying like, well, non-autistic advocates are not representative of the average person or whatever. But there's just like something about the fact that I think, especially when it comes to people who are like profound, as it were, like they're never going to be represented by self-advocates. So like, if you want to get to know those people and like learn about issues that they face, then you have to really like, you can't necessarily just listen to advocates. Like, even though what you're always told to do is like listen to the voices of such and such group, like if someone is non-speaking and also doesn't write, it's kind of like you do have to do something else to kind of get to know them and learn about them, because otherwise you really just aren't listening to them at all, because they don't have the type of voice that you think it's politically correct to listen to. Yeah, so again, I would recommend meeting people in person. I really like the channel SBSK, Special Books by Special Kids. I've kind of noticed recently that I don't really see people in disability advocacy spaces talking about this channel at all. I don't know if people think this channel is like sappy or like inspiration keyword or like too, I don't know. But I really like this channel because the guy interviews people with all kinds of different disabilities, and I specifically really like, he interviews both people that I would consider profound, who don't use language, so he kind of sits with them, engages with them and their families, and kind of talks through how you would like try to get to know this person and how you could connect with them. And so in the video, he kind of lets the person show their personality, and I really like that. I think it's kind of replicating an experience that you can have in person, but that because this group is like a small minority and also is often very isolated, which is, yeah, bad. But yeah, because this group is often isolated and a small minority, I think a lot of people don't get the opportunity to meet people in person, maybe. So I like that these videos kind of replicate that experience a little bit. And then another thing that I like is, you know, when he's interviewing people who have disabilities but can talk, depending on people's disabilities, it may sometimes take more work or a different approach to get people's opinions and get people to really express themselves. I think that's really important too. So I think what's hard is, like, the fact is there's some people with disabilities who, if you wait for someone to present themselves in the context where you're wanting to listen to people, you will just not really hear them because they may not be good bloggers or good interviewers when you give them a traditional interview. And yeah, I think that's really important. I don't know, I'm feeling very worked up. I guess it's just because I'm sick, but I'm really, like, wanting to make more videos about this. I feel just more and more frustrated as, like, an autistic person who has a lot of, like, personal and professional connections to the intellectual disability community. I just often feel like these conversations can be so hard to even, like, have with other people, even to get to, like, the basic points, like, So, anyway, just keep this in mind that that's just my take on these people, but, I know that I'm not the only person who feels this way.